Hello, and welcome to Trek in Time, the podcast that takes a look at Star Trek in order and in history. What I mean by that is that we're going to take a look at each episode of Star Trek in chronological order. And then we're also going to take a look at how things were in the world when those episodes originally broadcast. We'll take a deeper dive into the episodes and the eras in which they appeared. You're probably wondering, who's going to be doing all this talking? First, me. I'm Sean Farrell. I'm a writer, and my books include some sci-fi and some picture books. And with me is my brother Matthew. He's a tech guru, and he's the brain behind Undecided with Matt Farrell, which takes a look at emerging tech and its impact on our lives. Matt, do you want to say hi?
Hello, everybody.
Today, we're going to be talking about episode 5 of Enterprise. This episode aired on October 17th, 2001. It was viewed by 8.16 million people, and it was titled, unexpectedly, Unexpected.
Didn't see that coming.
What was the world like when this episode aired? Well, for the now 4th week in a row, Alicia Keys' Fallen was still the number one song. It was an important song, which is obvious from how long it's been at number one.
Just kept going.
It's interesting. I still, if you asked me to sing it, I couldn't do it. I have no idea what song it is.
No.
Training Day for the 2nd week in a row was the number one film in the country. This, of course, is the Denzel Washington, Ethan Hawke pairing about cop corruption and drug intrigue in Los Angeles. And as far as the competition airing at the time, ER was the most watched program that week. The day the episode aired, the New York Times had the following headline: Anthrax mailed to Senate is found to be potent form. Case tied to illness at NBC. There are also images underneath that headline, which showed the envelopes that were sent to Tom Daschle and Tom Brokaw.
I almost completely forgot about the Anthrax stuff. Based on September 11th is in my head, but
yeah, one of the sub headlines on that day's paper was about Powell suggests a role for the Taliban, and it was the growing. They were putting together the coalition that would eventually go in and attack Afghanistan and unseat the Taliban there. But this is the first headline that we've had up to this point. The episodes that we've discussed up to this point, it's all been 9/11. And this is the first headline we've seen where 9/11 got pushed from the main headline, and it was the anthrax scare. And it was a very strange time where mail in major metropolitan areas in DC and in New York City disappeared for a period of time. Post offices were being scoured and tested for anthrax. I live and work in New York City. We stopped getting mail for a period of time. I work in Midtown Manhattan. The place where I work even had anthrax concerns because the targeting seemed to be the sorts of political leanings seemed to be targeting people that were in line with where I work. So there were concerns like, could we potentially be impacted? And it was a strange. It was the first time that we had that kind of pervasive attack without any clear motive. And I compare it now to things like the mass shootings, which seem all too frequent and unmotivated in so many cases. And this was tied to that kind of thinking. It was just kind of a cloud that kind of rolled in, and it didn't seem to be making demands. There didn't seem to be a point behind it other than simply to hurt people. And so it was a scary time. So on to the episode, which, as I mentioned before, is titled Unexpected. Matt, do you want to read the synopsis for us?
Sure. A ship feeding off of Enterprise's warp field is exposed after the crew ignites a plasma exhaust. Commander Tucker takes a trip to the ship to help them repair their warp drive. After his return to Enterprise, he learns that he's, and I like this, giant quotes, pregnant. The nature of this event becomes a major plot device of the episode and took the series into the realm of hard science fiction. That's a weird
That's a
synopsis,
strange
Sean.
synopsis. We get our synopsis and our plot
Yes.
synopsis from Wikipedia. So it's
That's a weird
it
one.
seems a little off in the use of quotes around pregnant.
Yeah. Yeah. Because he was
technically
pregnant. And I don't think this takes us into the realm of hard science fiction. I would say Star Trek is hard science fiction, so I'm not sure. Making a man pregnant makes it hard sci-fi.
maybe they meant difficult to understand.
I don't know.
So into the plot points of the episode, as the synopsis mentioned, there is the ship which is cloaked and trailing the Enterprise. But before we get to that part, it starts off with, in engineering, Commander Tucker is trying to solve ship-wide problems with power supply and life support. The scene here is played for comic effect, and I don't know about you. I'll take a quick step back and say, overall, I felt like this episode was more tightly written than most of the other episodes up to this point. And I will say that it feels a little bit like when I envision series, I tend to think in rules of 4, 3.5 to 4. It takes 3.5 to 4 seasons for a series to suddenly like come together where everything seems to be clicking. And it can take 3.5 to 4 episodes for a longer plot cycle to start to get its feet underneath it. And I think that here we are now with episode 5. It's episode 5 because the first 2 episodes were a 2-parter. That's why we're in episode 4 of our podcast, but we're talking about episode 5 of the series. I feel like at this point, we've just crossed the part where the writers understand who these characters are and a lot of the dynamics between their relationships. And we're starting to see that click in a way where they now have enough shorthands to be able to get 5-6 minutes into an episode faster than they did 2 or 3 weeks ago, where it felt a little bit like still stumbling around in the dark a little bit, trying to figure out what these characters' shapes are. So
yeah, this felt like an episode that could have taken place in episode 4. I mean, it's season 4.
Yes.
It's like, it felt like we're all comfortable with the characters. Here's just a little isolated episode.
Yeah. And
Have fun.
And it's an opportunity
It's
for a
a
little bit of a
standalone thing.
deeper dive exploration of one particular character. We talked last week about the nice dynamics between Trip and T'Pol in the episode in which they are under the effects of an hallucinogenic spore or pollen, and they're trapped in a cave during a storm, and the tension comes from the fact that Trip has become paranoid to the point of dangerous. And the moment between the two of them in that episode, the tension really could have been replicated with any 2 characters. You could take anybody and put them in that situation. You could have had this exact same threat. Somebody's paranoid, he's got a weapon, the other person is unarmed. There's your danger. This episode only takes the shape it does because Trip is Trip. And so it feels much more like a character study episode than a plot driven episode. And I feel like at this point in the writing, the writers very clearly were comfortable with this kind of storytelling. This is something that had gone back to the very beginning of Next Generation, where they would have these episodes which would do deep dives into a particular character and really explore them. So at this point, the writers are very comfortable with this kind of approach. And I think it really shows, because from the very beginning, the episode looks like that. However, I still have difficulties with tone around some of the episodes here in Enterprise. They are flying at warp, and they are having ship-wide problems with power supply and life support. Right off the bat, the show starts with Captain Archer. It's not as bad as the gel scene from the pilot when T'Pol and Trip had to have a
Lube each other
very
up.
serious conversation about what was going on in their initial meeting, while also swabbing each other down with antibiotic gel. But this episode starts with Archer in the shower. And interesting that, first of all, it's a water shower. So at some point in Star Trek's future, they refer to sonic showers. Sound is being used to clean their bodies. But here is a literal water shower. And the gravity plates stop working. And so in a neat bit of visual effects, Archer not only floats, but the water begins to ricochet off the walls of the shower and turn into giant floating globules of water in ways that is very reminiscent of the tricks we've seen from the International Space Station, where the astronauts there will create videos to amuse people, showing them creating giant water bubbles and things like that. He immediately contacts the engineering to find out what's going on, and he is told, oh, we anticipate the gravity will come back on any moment now. And then thud, it comes back on. He falls to the ground. The water crashes around him. Slow trombone. There was nothing about that. And there's nothing about the following scene in engineering where Tucker is saying, I think I've almost got this figured out. There's nothing about any of that makes sense from a safety perspective. I had a lot of issues with the fact that the response to the gravity plates going off on an entire deck was that everybody looking to solve it is basically, yeah, we think it's going to come back any moment now. You would have to prepare everybody on that deck. You would have to, first of all, clear the deck, get people to go to whatever hatches and tubes inside the ship they would need to get off that deck before you would turn gravity back on. Because what if somebody was, let's say, asleep, and they had happened to float into a position where once the gravity comes back on, they come down and land on their head. It's played for comedy, but it's not played for comedy in a smart way. It's like putting a banana peel down and laughing at the fact that somebody steps on the banana peel, while also saying, this is a serious show that we should be taking seriously. And I don't like the juxtaposition of those tones. I also don't like the fact that Tucker, while they are flying at warp, is saying, I think I've almost got this figured out. I've almost got this, until something literally bursts into flames in the wall, has to be put out by the captain. And then he reluctantly admits, okay, maybe we should drop out of warp. None of that made any sense.
Yep.
So they do drop out of warp, and Subcommander T'Pol discovers that there's a distortion in the wake of the Enterprise, and they ignite the plasma that comes out of the back of the ship, and in that ignition, they're able to see the shape of a cloaked ship. 180-degree turn for me in tone. I loved this next scene of Archer hailing the alien vessel, and with the help of Sato, and I thought it was a real neat use of the universal translator. The first time that we see the universal translator live in action, breaking down the alien dialogue, where it starts off with the phrase completely an alien, and then it keeps looping and repeating until each word is individually deciphered, until it's a message that they can understand. And Archer's response to this moment is to with a lot of nimble back and forth, to reassure this alien vessel, look, we aren't interpreting what you did as hostile. We just want you to stop, and we want to talk. And he's able to get them to basically decloak and begin to have a discussion. And they have this first contact moment, which I think is very, very well rendered.
Yeah. I like the way that the entire scene where Archer comes up with the idea of igniting the plasma, everything from that point through what you just described, I loved. Because it's like, it shows this is why he's the captain, because he's rapidly thinking through what could be done. Like, he immediately comes up with a plan of, there might be something there because of that distortion. And he comes up with the whole idea of igniting the plasma. It's like, it's really fun to see Captain Archer thinking on his feet, thinking quickly, being what looks like he's 2 steps ahead of it, the rest of his crew. It looks like T'Pol clearly gets what he's about to do. So it was just kind of fun to see how the two of them look like they're kind of 2 steps ahead of the rest of the crew and thinking really quick. And his fancy footwork of diplomacy in that first contact was really cool too. It is a weird juxtaposition, as you pointed out, going from weird slapstick stuff in the opening to just like a hard left turn into what I would call cool, hard sci-fi stuff in that second part. It was just a weird juxtaposition. And there's more of that comes up later in the episode.
The conversation with the alien vessel turns out there's Zerillian, and the captain of the Zerillian vessel explains that they have been basically, what is it called when you drive close to a semi in order you're drafting. They've been drafting the Enterprise in order to take in their plasma to be able to help them with their own warp engine, which is not working properly. And Archer offers them assistance. Trip is going to go visit the alien vessel for 3 days to help them work on their engines. And he's given injections by Dr. Flock so his body can adapt to the alien environment. It's going to take a period of 3 hours to depressurize properly for him to be able to go in without getting the bends effectively. And this was another hard sci-fi moment in a show that Star Trek, while having hard sci-fi elements, usually just brushes past things in order to get to the next moment. One of the achievements of Enterprise is by being a prequel to all the previous generations. I think one of the things that it does well is take certain elements that have been taken for granted and shows them, like the universal translator, shows them in development, shows them not working well. The fact that the Enterprise doesn't have shields. They've got hull plating that can be reinforced, but they don't have shields. The fact that they don't have phasers, that the fact that they don't have photon torpedoes that look like they fly fast enough to actually get where they're supposed to be going. And when they get there, they are like an M80 that explodes with no effect. They are effectively a ship that is out, as he says to the alien vessel, when the captain of the Zerillian ship says, "We don't want to dissuade you from your mission," he says, "Our mission is to come out and to meet people." And that is effectively all they can do. So that this show then taking the step of showing Trip in a depressurization chamber, showing him being given cognitive tests. Is he functioning well? Is he processing things properly? I thought that was really, it looked like a game of Simon on the wall with him counting red flashes, green flashes, yellow flashes, blue flashes, until he finally loses patience with the speed of them and says, "Hey, like, you got to let me out of here." But once aboard, he meets the Zerillian engineer. Her name is Alen, and they become friendly while repairing the ship. He's there for 3 days. And this is the point in the show where I always try and keep in mind as I'm watching the episodes, like, what works, what doesn't work. This next segment for me, and maybe you want to jump in with your thoughts on this. Trip begins to effectively trip. He begins to have, he's having a reaction to the depressurization process in this new environment. He's having difficulty adjusting. What were your thoughts about how they rendered all of this?
I thought it was very kind of like realistic the way they showed him from his perspective of getting kind of trippy and not understanding what was going on, but Trip being Trip and just wanting to get the work done. He's pushing through it, trying to man up and push through it. I liked that. And the fact that he started to kind of freak out, basically called his mommy and daddy and said, "I want to come home from camp," and was basically just like, "Get me out of here. This is not working." I liked it, but I understand why some people, and I'm assuming you probably didn't like it. I'm just going to jump to a conclusion, but I liked it because it showed all the training that he went through, all that stuff he went through. He has a breaking point, and it's fun to see Trip not being this super buttoned up, like kind of what we assume is a Starfleet officer that we know from all of Star Trek. He's really rough around the edges, and it was kind of fun to see him just kind of like literally freak out and be like, I can't do this. This isn't working. I tried. I got to get out of here. This is not working. I like that aspect of it.
I really liked that aspect as well. I liked that from a character perspective. The place where I ended up with some interesting internal debates about whether or not I thought it was working was the way that they affected the video and the audio to convey his fugue state. And I was of two exactly opposite takes on it at the exact same time. I both liked it and didn't like it. On one hand, I felt like, is this kind of dated? The kind of woozy cam, super zoom in at certain points, feeling like maybe the image is twisting a little bit, the audio being slowed, things being perceptive, changes in the way it's being demonstrated, as opposed to just showing an external shot of him, maybe a little too sweaty, maybe a little too pale, maybe having to hold himself up on a wall, being a little slow on the uptake. At the same time, I just got my second vaccination shot. And for 24 hours after getting that shot, everything felt a little slow. Everything felt a little too zoomed in. Everything was a little too bright. I found, and this was an interesting experience, I thought my skin was annoying. Everything was a little too prickly. Everything was a little too warm. Everything was a little too much. And I tried to push through it and couldn't really, ended up staggering around and having conversations where mentally I knew I was fine. Mentally, I knew, like, I'm not legitimately sick. This is my body reacting to the injection. So I can push through and I can have a conversation. And seeing the looks on the faces of the people that I live with, whom I'm trying to have these conversations with, particularly my son, who at one moment was looking at me like, Dad, what the heck are you talking about? And saying, I'm a little out of it, so I'm going to stop talking now. So there was something about it that made me think, is this a dated way of doing this? Would they do this now? And then I started to think, well, how would it have looked in the original series? And I thought, not only would they have done something similar in the original series, they would have gone even further with, like, there would have been weird zither music, and it would have been like weird cameras on the ceiling and cameras on the floor. They would have gone super trippy. It would have been
psychedelic backgrounds.
It would have been lots of funky lights and extreme. I could just imagine a moment of showing like Kirk having this kind of experience. It would have been like he would have been super sweaty and really big mascara, eye makeup, and I realized, okay, they were doing what they needed to in order to convey this. It was effective in that way. So while there was a part of me that was like, is this silly? There was another part of me that was like, no, they've got a point, and it's not going to be like this for the entire episode. So I just thought it was an interesting sort of, I was both experiencing and enjoying the story as a storytelling, but also the moment of how they got that stood out as a device, but it didn't ruin it for me.
Yes.
So eventually, though, Trip, as Matt mentioned, he does contact the ship. Archer, please let me come home. Archer, after communicating with the other captain, says, sorry, no, they think you're going to be okay. You just need to rest. Do what you have to help them. And Trip reluctantly does. It's after this that he, in conversation with Alen, who I thought Alen as a character and as an actor, that actress had actually been in episodes of Voyager. And I thought she does a really nice job with this character, who she's wearing so much makeup, top to bottom. Like, there's no part of a human face other than her eyes, and even those are wearing contacts that are visible. I thought that she does a really great job of being able to emote concern toward this. For her, it's this alien has come aboard trying to help, is struggling, and she just wants to help. And his experiences on the ship are a little more, I won't say intimate in a romantic way, but it's an experience that isn't often depicted on Star Trek, of just the nuts and bolts of eating and drinking being a key point in the character's experience.
Two characters just being
Yeah.
together. It wasn't romance. It was just two characters being close together in a whole bunch of situations and seeing what it was like for those 3 days.
Yeah.
Of the two of them being together. That I thought was pretty good. I'm gonna pick on a weird thing. You said it was a dated, potentially how they were portraying that thing. The entire time they're on this ship, I don't know how you felt about it. I felt like I was watching a Doctor Who episode because the set of the alien ship looked like it was made of painted cardboard and leftover pieces that they had from other things. Like it looked like they made that on a stripped down budget and timeline of like, we have to throw something in and let's just pump a lot of smoke in here and do some dim lighting because this looks awful. And like it looked really cheap at times with the stuff that they were doing on the alien ship, which I found very disappointing. And it was kind of jarring, especially during I'll wait till we get to it, but the holodeck scene, which is coming up.
Yeah, that'll be interesting when we talk
in a
about
minute.
that, because I didn't quite find that as jarring. I thought that they created limited environments, and one of the things, maybe this is one of the things that you were picking up on, is the engineering area on Enterprise, of course, is like, it's a large room. There's a very clear engine section, which is thrumming, and there's panels, and they open up the panels and they bring things out to work on them. The engineering section that they're working on in this alien vessel looks very much like they are underneath a car on a lift, and it's got
the dangling
cables and spinning. It's like just like coils. And one of the issues that they're talking about is it's technobabble, but it's like these coils have lost their polarity or whatever it is, and they need to reform it. And the way we do that is by injecting stuff into it and allowing it to redo its thing that it needs to do. And meanwhile, it looks like they are at a Home Depot underneath a shelf full of stuff. Yeah.
Just
and
junk.
It doesn't.
It's just junk hanging down. It's like, this is not a spaceship. This is not a believable spaceship. They wouldn't have just random things just dangling down. It's like, that's like what are they in a jalopy? Like, is this thing like duct tape? You know what I mean? It looks so cheap. Like, this is not an engineering section. It just like having them on those little paddleboard things.
Wheel underneath.
They were just like crab walking. It was like, come on. It's like, we're not at Jiffy Lube here. Can we do something a little more interesting with the visuals? I just thought it was very cheap. It was kind of distracting for me.
So while they're working on the ship and Trip is feeling better and he's able to function normally, and he's really engaging with Alen on a level of, as he's told when he's leaving, to Paul reminds him, like, you're a diplomat here. You need to go over and represent the best of the Federation. Not the Federation, excuse me. I misspoke. You've got to represent the best of Earth in this situation. And he goes over, and it is a very charming friendship that is developing, a mutual respect and mutual interest. And it's nice to see that back and forth. And it's also very clear that there's a certain level of attraction in both directions, but neither person is making a move in that regard at the outset. It does not look like this is going to be Kirk goes to the alien planet and within the first 6 hours is bedding the queen of the planet. That's not what's going to happen here. So they are repairing the vessel. They have some downtime while they're waiting for something to happen. And Alen takes Trip to what is a holodeck. This is the first time that a human is experiencing a holodeck. This is, of course, not the first time that we, the viewers, are seeing a holodeck. For us, a holodeck is, it's old news, but it's a neat interpretation of what the first experience would be like for a human. And he goes into the holodeck with Alen and sees what the Zerillian homeworld looks like, and is able to experience walking around on the surface of the planet and even getting into a rowboat on what looks like a lake. Matt, you said you had some thoughts about the holodeck, and I'm interested to hear what you say.
It was just like I said, everything about it felt cheap. It's like, here's a show that's more modern than the Next Generation, and yet the depiction of when the holodeck goes into effect looked cheaper than it did on a show that probably came out 15, 20 years earlier. I was just shocked by that. It's like the green screen effect of them walking out and having the thing change. It looked like something I would make in my house. The special effects were not good. It looked super fake. It's part of the cheapness I'm talking about. It's like, I don't know why it felt that way. It's like they clearly had the technology to pull this off.
I think that's interesting that you say that, because in that moment, my response was, that is so cool that they are showing an earlier version of a holodeck that isn't able to work as well as the holodecks that we, the viewer, are accustomed to in a show like the Next Generation, where if they wanted to render the level of Next Generation level effects, they could have, and they could have done what is usually done on the Next Generation. They could have gone into a location. They would just go someplace in a desert and film them actually in a desert.
Let me be very clear though. It's more about the initial shot of them walking into the room. Once they're like on the boat and stuff, it's all fine. But it's like when they're in the room, it's like they're walking into the room and I'm like, oh, they're not really in that room. They're in a fake room. And then it turns into the holodeck environment, where that's what I'm complaining about. Once they're like, she's showing him the homeworld and they're on the boat. It's like that stuff. It's like, it wasn't a distraction at that point. It was just when they entered the room and then left the room, it was like, why does that look so cheap? Like the rest of it looked fine. It's like, why? It's like they didn't feel like they were in a real space when they were supposed to be in a real space. That's kind of what I'm getting at. It's like the room that they were supposed to be in wasn't an actual room they were in. They were probably standing in a green screen room, which was supposed to be the real room.
Okay.
It's the real
now
room.
I get what you're
like
saying.
It was just, it was so distracting.
I didn't notice that. Again, I just had my second shot. So who's to say? My skin
feels funny.
So while they're in the holodeck, Alen introduces what she describes as a game, and it involves what looks like a bowl full of crystals, and they both put their hands into it, and they are able to read some of each other's thoughts. And it seems like it could get incredibly intimate, but it only gets as intimate as a little bit of the flirtation, where she picks up on his liking to be complimented. He picks up on her interest in him and her curiosities around him. And they have a nice moment around this, but it doesn't turn into anything else. The repairs seem to be completed. Tucker returns, and his reintroduction aboard the Enterprise is, as one would expect, largely talking with the other members of the crew about what an amazing experience this was. He had a good experience, and he's able to, and this is also the first time that they have a first contact experience or an away from the ship experience where his involvement not only happens, but makes sense. He went to the away mission aboard on the planet where they got in trouble and they were hiding in the cave. His presence on that planet made no sense because there was nothing there for an engineer to do. And in a previous episode, he had begged to go on an away mission, and the captain had said, "You're our engineer. We need you here." So this one, him going aboard and helping repair this alien vessel makes complete sense. And for his character, makes complete sense.
Which would have actually been better if they hadn't had him go in those previous two. They could have had him be chomping at the bit in both those episodes, but not go. And then this one, they're like, finally, Trip, here's your away mission. And he could just be so gung-ho about it. It's like, I don't know why they didn't do that.
So he returns to the ship and he begins to notice a strange growth on his wrist. And Dr. Phlox continues to make the great argument for him being one of the better characters on the show. He's written in a really charming way. And I don't know, there's something Dr. Zoidberg about him that I really like. It's this kind of like, well, you're human. What are you going to do? It's this weird sort of response to everything around him, just like a little bit of a shrug and, hey, what do you think? And he points out that the growth on Tucker's wrist happens to be a nipple. Yes.
Can I just comment right here? You had used the word silly for that initial scene. This entire episode, I would say, is just silly. The entire episode is meant to be silly. It's comic relief. And what I found funny about this, the way they did it, was the first half, which we just talked about, had little silly moments and it was a little lighthearted, but it wasn't haha funny. And then the nipple happens, and from this point forward, it turns into Comic Town. From this point forward, pretty much, which I thought was a weird, not a weird, but I thought it was a unique shift in tone of the show. Of just like, we're being a little lighthearted, and now it's just straight on. Let's be goofy.
It does get a little goofy. I think that it gets goofy, though, in a way that the initial third of the episode, the first act, is not goofy, but is lighthearted, yet hard sci-fi underneath it. And then I do think that the follow-up, an examination of what would male pregnancy have to entail, is, as the synopsis writer that you read earlier pointed out, that is a hard sci-fi element. I agree with you that it goes into kind of a goofy interpretation of all of that, but it's not for me, it was not a super drastic shift in tone. It didn't go from a 9 to a 3. It went from maybe a 5 to a 3.
Okay. For me, it was a little more drastic. And when I say goofy, I don't mean that in a derogatory
meant,
way. I mean it more of I did enjoy I'm going to comment on this, but there were some comedic moments that are just coming up that are so good.
So Phlox says, oh, by the way, that's a nipple. Turns out you're pregnant. And I really enjoyed this goes back to something you'd mentioned about Trip being a little rough around the edges. It's a little bit like, you know, he's a Starfleet guy, but he's got a little bit of a swagger to him that makes it's a little bit of, he's the stand-in for the Old West, and that they're rushing off into what Next Generation will eventually describe the original series as, with cowboy diplomacy. This is the origins of cowboy diplomacy. The Enterprise is literally like going off into unknown territory and making it up as they go. And Trip is very much the cutout of that. He is that character of, I got a little bit of swagger, I got a little bit of arrogance, I really know what I'm talking about, but I'm going to kind of sometimes go into the saloon a little too quickly. And there are some really great moments where he is with Phlox and Archer and T'Pol, basically making the argument, I never touched that woman.
This whole scene is very Neil Simon. The dialogue is very quick. Everybody is saying just the right thing at the right moment. And it's like, T'Pol has the most biting comments. She is just rattling off at him and his responses, and the captain just trying to contain his laughter. The entire conversation, it was just this very quick repartee between all four of these characters as he's trying to defend himself, saying, I never touched her. I never touched her. It was a very, very good moment. I just like the comedic moments in this. In that
so
scene.
I agree with everything you just said. It is very Neil Simon, and I love that it reaches a point where Tucker makes the argument, I understand how you perceive me, but I take my role on this ship and my goal of becoming an officer in Starfleet extremely seriously, and I wouldn't just throw that away. And then makes a statement which basically mocks Kirk. I felt like he makes a statement of, I'm not going to go and try and bed some woman I just met on an alien ship just to get my rocks off. And it's an undercutting of the entire Kirk persona, which I thought was a very funny take. I agree with everything you're saying. T'Pol keeps trying to like pin this on him of like everything that we have, all the evidence we have says you had some form of intercourse with this woman. You cannot debate that. The facts are the facts. You are pregnant. This thing happened. Phlox is clarifying that for this species, the male doesn't actually provide any genetic material. The male is the host. So this is the equivalent of, you know, non-sexual reproduction, but then like the seahorse the male carries it in a pouch. So Phlox is clearly understanding of how this happened. He's hesitant to do anything to change the situation out of fear of potentially harming either the fetus or Trip. And to add complication to it, the development of this into a ready to be born life form is only, I think they state, 5 weeks. So this is not we've got time to think about this. This thing is growing quickly to the point where it is beginning to show as a figure and a bruise on his side. In response to this, Archer decides they need to find the Zarellian ship. And so he has the search started to be able to track this cloaked vessel. And while they are looking, Trip begins to experience hormone changes that change his, again, it's a perception game that's being played. He is becoming paranoid. This part of the storytelling, I thought, could have been a little more sensitive. It seemed to be a little bit mocking of a pregnant woman's experience across the board.
Yes. Yeah.
I would have appreciated a little bit more of Phlox giving him a heads up of, you may notice hormonal changes. You may notice these things that happen. It didn't mean that those things had to happen. They do happen in the story, and they happen for comedic effect. Again, didn't hit quite the right note for me. I felt like that was a little weak. But eventually they do find the Zarellian ship. And when they track it down, there's a dramatic moment of they show the ship that they see on their sensors, and it turns out it's a Klingon warship. So the Zarellians are back to their old game of drafting in the wake of another ship. Their repairs obviously didn't work. And Archer then hails the Klingon ship and talks with a Captain Varrock, who then helps detect the Zarellian ship. Varrock is very angry, wants to destroy the ship, and then Archer and T'Pol have to talk Varrock down from destroying the ship. And they do this by T'Pol reminding Varrock that Archer is the one who, in the series opener, found Klang, saved Kronos from a civil war, and the Chancellor owes Archer a debt. She goes a bit into overselling that, referring to the Chancellor calling Archer a brother, which turns into a comedic moment at the end of the episode. This entire scene felt like, you mentioned earlier, the episode takes a turn in tone. This felt like another major turn in tone into, okay, we have to have some stakes here. So how about these are the stakes? Klingons are involved. Klingons are a threat. Klingons are dangerous. I did not like the way Archer approached the Klingons. I did not like the fact that he outed the Zarellian ship. I thought that it would have been better storytelling to, let's say they find the Klingon ship, they know the Zarellian's there. If Archer had approached it with give me a broad broadcast, and then he could have
talking to them in code.
His language to the Zarellians so that it would sound like he was talking to the Klingons, but actually talking to the Zarellians, and saying something along the lines to them of, if you've been having engine trouble, we are more than willing to help you again. But in order to do that, we're just going to hang out here. And if you need our help, you can come over to us. And the Klingons, of course, would say, what are you talking about? We don't need your help. And then the Zarellians could drop behind the Enterprise and the Klingons could leave, and they would then be able to reconnect. Play a little more of a chess game as opposed to what Archer does here, which is very stupidly hails the Klingons and outs the Zarellians, which almost leads to their destruction and brings the Enterprise under attack. It seemed like a very strange stance to take, and done entirely for putting stakes into the story instead of showing Archer having a sophisticated take and the skills to be able to secretly convey to the Zarellians, you got to get away from those guys. They're dangerous. Just hang out here with us and let them leave.
And then still trying to place elements of this a little bit for laughs. Because like this episode is kind of a comedy. And so when this is happening, there's elements of the way the Klingons are talking to them and the way they're talking to the Klingons throughout the show that is clearly being played for laughs because they're trying not to lose that lighthearted tone, even though they almost had the Enterprise destroyed by what they did. It was, for me, there was a dissonance there as well.
So they do end up getting out of the dangerous situation with the Klingons. Tucker is able to reconnect with Alen and show that he's got this embryo. She apologizes and says she wasn't even aware that that was a possibility, and that they will be able to take the offspring out of Trip. This is also, it's been conveyed to Trip a number of different times in the episode. This is the first time a human has ever had interspecies reproduction with a non-human. So he's getting a weird pat on the back for now being in history books in that fashion. But there is also, in order to get out of the dilemma with the Klingons, another element that I did not agree with at all. Archer basically promises the Zorellian holodeck technology to the Klingons. And it's such a weird moment of like, listen, if you don't beat me up, I'm going to give you my neighbor's lawnmower. It's like, it doesn't make any sense. It just, and it's done again for a moment of them standing in the holodeck and looking at Kronos from a digital recording that the Klingons provide, just so that the Klingons, I felt like it was all done so that a Klingon could give the line, "I can see my house from here," which, as you point out, it seems to be going for comedy in moments like that. Maybe they thought they needed to balance things out because the previous episode had such a strong thriller aspect with the cave scenes and the paranoia and the danger. And the episode before that had horror aspects around the aliens that were siphoning off fluids from dead, an alien vessel crew. Maybe they felt like, oh, we need a lighter touch in this episode. We need to do something to lighten the mood, but it went a little too far in that vein. And moments like the Klingon saying, "I can see my house from here," is just, it just kind of struck a really strange note. But the episode ends with, the dinner scenes that they've used to great effect, to Paul informing Tucker that he's the first recorded instance of a male pregnancy, and Archer's response to much of this is to laugh into his napkin. It's throughout most of the episode. One of the things that stood out for me that I thought was an interesting element was that there was one of the staff members on the show, Andre Bormanis, said that they included a Klingon battlecruiser design that was of later generations using the same design, and that was intentional because they wanted to show how slowly evolving the Klingon technology was. And it was compared to rockets from the Russian space agency. Once you've got what works, why change it? And so the Klingons, the implication here is, in the original series, Klingons are still flying ships that this is what the Enterprise has just come across. Ships like this are still being used in the original series, largely because, hey, it gets us where we're trying to go and it lets us blow stuff up. Why would we change anything? I thought that was interesting.
Which also ties into the holodeck stuff, because Next Generation introduced the holodeck, and the holodeck introduced here kind of is laying the groundwork for, maybe this is where we got the seed of that technology for, and it took us, decades for us to work it out on our own and integrate it into our own stuff. And Klingons don't have that stuff in the show, but yet they were given this technology at the same time as the Enterprise. So you could also look at it that way too, of like, they're slow to evolve and they've been given this amazing holodeck technology and they still don't really do anything with it.
Also, it raises the question of applications. Would this be an origin of some of the cloaking technology that Klingons use? And would that be how they would manipulate it, as opposed to what humans did, which was continue to utilize it for interior, safe recreation space for not only recreation, but humanity appears to use it for research, to recreate environments where you could do things that might potentially be difficult to do, but to recreate it in realistic fashion. So a little bit of a deeper dive into one of the aspects of the program, which it raises the issue of male pregnancy. So I was curious about male pregnancy, and it, of course, does happen. There are species of fish, and I already mentioned horsefish being one of them, or seahorse, sorry, being one of them, where the male carries the young. There has also been ongoing research, which is very slow for ethical reasons, which is understandable, into uterus transplantation and artificial uterus, which all the issues around abortion being such a hot topic. Any research in this vein hits ethical dilemmas on both sides of the issue. The concerns around what you'd be doing, what you'd be looking into, obviously is a minefield to have to get through for a bioethicist and doctors looking into this. But I did find this interesting. Since the year 2000, several hoax websites have appeared on the internet purporting to describe the world's first pregnant man. I actually do remember seeing news like this bubble up back then, describing the first pregnant man. He would be giving delivery, cesarean section. It was through an egg that was implanted in his abdomen in an artificial placenta. And obviously this never happened. But while some of these articles, these hoax websites, relied on legitimate scientific claims, no such experiment has ever been reported. Fertility clinician Cecil Jacobson claimed to have transplanted a fertilized egg from a female baboon to the omentum in the abdominal cavity of a male baboon in the mid-1960s, which then carried the fetus for 4 months. However, Jacobson did not publish his claims in a scientific journal. It was subsequently convicted on several unrelated counts of fraud for ethical misconduct. So,
shocker.
When it comes to men choosing voluntarily to carry a fetus, I don't think we're going to be seeing it anytime soon. So next time, we're going to be talking about episode 6 of Enterprise, and the title of this episode is going to be Terra Nova. Matt, do you have any guesses as to what we'll be talking about around that episode? What do you think Terra Nova is about?
It's probably about a nova.
Maybe a little bit of a Terra.
That's made of some Terra.
Yeah.
Maybe some Earth.
Side note, I just watched an episode of Space 1999, which is a fantastic 1970s sci-fi program, which is a mix of Star Trek by way of 2001 Space Odyssey. One of my favorite parts about it is that the commander, whose name is John Koenig, is largely responsible for terrible decision-making that puts most of the crew in danger in every single episode. But there was an episode I just watched, which was also called Terra Nova. And I thought, what a great opportunity for a crossover. Before we sign off, Matt, is there anything you'd like to remind our listeners or viewers about that you have going on? And do you want to let them know how to find you online?
Yeah, just go to YouTube and search for Undecided with Matt Farrell. I put out videos every week talking about sustainable technologies, everything from EVs, battery technology, solar panels. I kind of dive deep into a lot of those different technologies. So check it out.
In the same vein, Matt and I have another podcast, which is called the Still to Be Determined podcast, in which we pick up on the topics from his videos and we talk about them and respond to some viewer comments about his episodes. And as for me, you can check out my website. It's seanfarrell.com. You can also look for my books on Amazon or on any non-mega bookstore shelf. They're available wherever. And if you ask for them, bookstores will be able to get them. So please check them out. I have some adult novels, including Man in the Empty Suit, which is a sci-fi tale. And I also have a couple picture books for your younger readers. Thanks to everybody for listening. If you have any comments or corrections, and believe me, when it comes to corrections around shows like Star Trek, Matt and I are more than willing to engage in that conversation. Sometimes we're going to get it wrong. And sometimes you, the viewer, are going to be like, don't you remember that this element that you said was stupid is something that is critical for the next generation to even exist? We're willing to have that conversation. Please let us know. You can find the contact information in the podcast notes or right here on YouTube. You can just drop down to the comments below. Please do subscribe. Please like the episode. And please share it widely with your friends and strangers. And we invite you to come back next time. We'll talk to you next week. Thanks so much for listening.